Please be polite and keep your phones off and stay seated during our speaker tonight. And help me enthusiastically welcome our speaker, our very special friend, Lewis.
Hopefully that's the right size. Anyways, my name's Lewis, and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date is December 15th of 2018. So not been too long. And I'm what you might call a really slow learner. But some of my story is I was born here in Arizona, raised here in Arizona before migrating to Alaska later, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But, I came from a really normal family, and one of the things I like about AA and hearing speaker meetings and so forth is that, everybody's story is different, and some of them are really harsh, and some are not. But it doesn't really matter because alcoholism is what brought us all here together. And for me, I like to hear everybody's stories because I can relate to them in one way or another. I'm hoping that somebody here will relate to mine today. Anyways, I was born in a very tight family. We were very family oriented. We got together on all kinds of holidays and celebrations and so forth, but I never really thought anybody in my family had an alcohol problem. I saw my parents drinking a little bit. I saw my grandparents drinking a little bit, but I really didn't pay much attention to it. I hear a lot of times where people talk about where they didn't know how they fit in, but I really never was that way. As a kid, I always had a place. I was always doing something. I either had my own business, cleaning pools, or just doing all kinds of different things to keep myself busy. But I did notice that, later on that my dad did drink quite a bit, and my mother was on Valium all the time. So it was kind of like we were let go to do whatever we wanted to do. And when I look back at some of the things we did as kids, we hear a lot of things about the temperature here in Arizona, that it's really hot out right now. Well, back when I was a kid in Kearney, Arizona, at 122 degrees, we would go outside in the summer, and our parents didn't even know what we were doing. We were walking around, we were jumping in the Gila River in the middle of flood time, and how crazy is that? And that was before I started drinking. But I knew that I started to think something was up the first time my grandparents came to Tucson to pick me up, and they were going to take me down to the border to Nogales. And my brothers and sisters were all ticked off. And so my grandparents come to pick me up, and they put me in the back of the car, and I'm in the back window, waving at my brothers and sisters as we're driving out of the driveway. And they really didn't realize it until later, but the only reason they wanted me to go is they could bring 2 extra bottles of booze back with them across the border. But that never really sunk in. And with my grandmother, I saw her drink every once in a while, but I really didn't think she had a problem until much later when I was visiting her for a weekend. And she always got up really early in the morning, like 5 in the morning. And so I got up one morning out early, which I rarely do, and she had a glass of water on the counter, and I just grabbed it and took a swig at it because I was thirsty, and it wasn't water. It was vodka at 5 o'clock in the morning, and so things started to relate that there was some things going on with alcohol that, I really didn't know, and, I really didn't know how that was going to affect me later on in my life, alcohol-wise, or how I acted to other people. And one of the things that my grandmother used to do is I would send her letters all the time, and she would always send them back to me corrected. And I didn't really feel that good about it, so then I just stopped writing. And I didn't realize it was probably her alcoholism that was causing her to have control or whatever. She was a teacher, but I really didn't pick up on that until way later. We lived all over Arizona. I was born in Phoenix. We moved to Flagstaff and then to Casa Grande and then a little town called Choo Choo. and then to Tucson, and then to Kearney, and then to Show Low, and to Sierra Vista. So we kind of went all over the place. We moved around a lot, so moving wasn't anything really new to me. When I was growing up, I started playing golf really early. I was into sports and athletics. If anybody remembers the President's Fitness Award that they had in the 60s, that was a really big thing for us kids to be able to get that. And I started playing golf early in Kearney at 8 years old. And I also played Little League Baseball. And I have a story about that too, but this is all just to kind of set a preferences or show how kind of normal things were for me as a kid. I always wanted to be a professional golfer. And then in baseball, I played Little League, and my dad and mom would never come to the games. Of course, I never really knew why, but they never would come. I often thought that in Arizona, in the middle of the desert at baseball season, they were spraying that DDT around for the mosquitoes, if anybody remembers that. So I figured that's how I got so weird. But when I played Little League, I never got picked. And I started to get really subconscious about my athletic abilities because I was always the last person picked for sports. And I didn't realize it until later when my grandmother asked me if I could read a license plate on the other side of the street. And I asked her what license plate. So I was the last person picked in Little League the first 3 years. And then the next year I got glasses. And I made All-Stars. So it was an experience for me where I thought I was either going to be a professional baseball player or a professional golfer. And I was really going on that path. And then my dad, being the migrant worker in the telephone company, came home one day and he said, "We're moving to Alaska." And so we all said, "Great, when?" He said, "Next week." And so we up and moved from Show Low to a place where I was playing baseball and golf almost every day to a place that had no baseball and no golf. So it's like, what are you going to do? So I really got into my schoolwork and independent jobs. I did a lot of things, pretty simple, lifeguarding, janitorial work, and I worked all the way through high school. I had a really high 4.0 average in high school for grades, so that was kind of unusual when we went from school to keep that. And I really did not want anything to do with drinking. And so we had a high school class party for seniors, and I was probably the only one there that didn't drink. In fact, I showed up, well, a little bit later, I learned that everybody liked to drink, and in Juneau, Alaska, we didn't have Coors beer. And I had gone on a road trip, and I filled up my little Fiat with Coors beer and brought it back to sell it to all the other students. So I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart. But it was kind of scary when I went across the border because I thought they were going to open my trunk, and here I was like 17 years old and had all this beer in my trunk. But they didn't. But so the next thing that really happened major in our family life is that we were kind of the house that everybody went to. And there was people that would drink at our house, kids that would drink at our house, and my dad would come down the stairs and he'd see everybody drinking and he'd get all flustered and say, "You guys shouldn't be drinking in my house. You know what I'm going to do?" And everybody's all scared and he says, "I'm going to have a beer." So, it just he made the environment for everybody to drink, but I still hadn't gone down that path yet. So we ended up with this foreign exchange student from Australia, and he was a drinker. And the first time I had alcohol was with Jeff, and we went to a high school party, his high school. I was graduated at that time, and they had Foster's Lager. He brought Foster's Lager, and those really big beers, right? So I had one of those, and I only had one, but I remember we got a ride back. It was just starting to snow, and we had to walk up the guy couldn't make it up our street in the vehicle, so we had to walk up 315 stairs to get to the bottom of the hill so we could walk up to the rest of our house. And I remember laughing and having a good time and thinking about the party with my friend. And when we got to the top of the hill, I looked back down the hill, and our footprints went back and forth and back and forth. And I only had one beer, but it was a big one. And so that was kind of the start of my drinking. And I was working at a bank, and my future boss was a client, and he asked me to go to work for him, and I said I would do that, and I said, where am I going to work? And he said, well, you're going to work in Sitka. And so I had to move from Juneau to Sitka all on my own. I was about 19 years old. The drinking age was 19. I didn't really have much to do over in Sitka but run the business, so I started partying with a lot of friends, and that's kind of where my drinking really got going. It even got going so bad that we were at a lake party one time, and we got into a mess with a bunch of people, and I was at the wrong place at the wrong time and ended up getting really bad trouble and ended up having to spend some time in jail. And I told myself at that point that I was going to have to calm down and be more conscientious about what I did, so that I did not like that, having to spend 30 days in jail. Even though I had a work release every day to go to work 7 days a week, I still didn't like being in that facility, so I didn't want to do that anymore. At the same time, another friend and I, and drinking led to this, disco was really the craze, right? And so we created our own mobile disco. And we would go around, loaded of course, to all the high schools and play music, and to nightclubs. We even played a gig for Alaska Airlines at one of their Christmas parties. And it was just a party from the minute you put on the music till you went to sleep at night. We never really got in any kind of trouble doing that, but other than just a lot of drinking. And after I had gotten in trouble there in Sitka, I felt really self-conscious being a business person there, and I didn't want to stay any longer, so I decided to talk my friend into moving back here to Arizona for a little while. So we brought our disco back here to Arizona, and we moved to a place called Sin City, if anybody knows where that is, at Arizona State University. We weren't going to school, but we thought we could make some money in the disco business, and we only played one gig at the apartments there, but we did get in kind of some trouble. Guns were involved, but not too bad. After that gig, we kind of went our separate ways, and I decided I needed to get a job. So I went to the Point Resort, and at the time they had the only 5-star disco here in Arizona. And so I auditioned to be a DJ, which I got that job as a part-time basis. But in the meantime, I needed more work, so I became a bartender. And that was really not a good thing for a guy like me. Not only were you mixing drinks all night, every night, but they encouraged you to drink on the job. And so it got pretty ugly for quite a while. And that's what led to that gun incident at the apartments. As I was coming home from work one night, and I pulled into the driveway or the parking lot, and a motorcycle with no lights on hit me in the back of my Volkswagen Bug, and he went flying about 300 or 400 feet in the air. And they determined it was his fault for running the red light and all that kind of stuff. But his buddies, the biker buddies, are the ones that came over when we were having our gig at the apartments, and they're the ones that started shooting out the windows and not being very nice to everybody else around us. They never found our place, but they thought they did. Anyways, so there was some pretty ugly times there. After all that, we had a family business still going in Alaska, and my dad decided he wanted to go take on another job, so I went back to Alaska and basically took his place at working in the business. I didn't run the business, but I ran it, and I got into sales. And sales for me as an ex-bartender and a drinker and a DJ was not a really good mix at all. And drinking became kind of a way of life. Every function that we were at had alcohol in massive quantities. We would sponsor events and, of course, order extra so we could keep it for the rest of the month or the rest of the year. It kind of sent me down a path where I wasn't very responsible. And things that used to get me down and I really never thought much of it until I came through this program and wanted to get sober. But I had a reputation in town that don't call Lewis before 10 o'clock in the morning because he's not going to be at work. If he is, he's certainly not going to be in any condition to do any work. And I just thought it was fun. And another one of the things like that made me start to think that I needed to do something different was I worked with the architectural and design community a lot, and I showed up to an appointment one time on time, and the people weren't ready for me, and I asked them, I said, well, we had an appointment at such and such a time, and the woman that owned the place said, well, you're always a half hour late, so we weren't even ready for you. So, I mean, it just made me start thinking that, I really had a problem. Some of the things that we would do with my friends is they had this thing in Juneau called wine night at the pizza parlor, and it was 10 cents a glass. And for $1, you could get really hammered, And we did that every single Thursday night, and it just led, it was Thursday night, and it led all the way through Sunday. It just kept going and going. Some of the other things that happened to me while I was in sales in Juneau that I think is a little unique is one of my clients was the Alaska State Legislature. And sometimes I don't like to tell this story, but I'm gonna anyways, is that I also got into some drugs, some cocaine, for just a very little bit of time. It's because all my clients were doing it. And I remember one time they hired us. I had an office furniture and interior design business in Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau, and Okinawa. And they hired us to design this office space, and we did it, and they liked it so much they asked us to come back and help them design their penthouse. And I thought, well, this building doesn't have a penthouse. So what it was the top of the elevator shaft. There was a small room on the top. It was maybe about 15 feet by 15 feet. And that's where all the legislators went during session to do their drugs. And so they didn't have any money left in the budget to buy furniture from me, but we also owned a copier company, and they could buy replacement parts. So I sold them these glass doors that they could put on their tables so they could use for their parties. And I never really thought, I just thought it was kind of funny until later, and I sobered up and I went, man, that was pretty wild to be involved in that kind of stuff. And I really started to think about how massive a problem of addiction is in our society. It happens all the time and you don't even think about it, especially when you're caught up in it, day to day. After I decided that Juneau was a very small town and there wasn't that much business there, that I could migrate to Anchorage, which was a bigger city and more business. And there was so much opportunity there that we ended up moving up there, my brothers and I, and opening up the business up there. And that really expanded for us, but at the same time we got more and more into, you might say, the corporate life and alcohol, because our companies were large companies, energy companies. Let's see, I could say one that's not in business anymore. So Arco, for example, was a large oil company. And those guys, all the executives expected you to go out with them or travel around the country with them or wherever they wanted to go to look at office furniture. They expected you to go with them. And they were very rude. But at the same time, if you wanted their business, you kind of played along with it. So it made it so that just became part of our business plan. So much so that when we were in organizations such as the Alaska Petroleum Club, we would sponsor events with really high-end wine And then we would have all of our clients come. There'd be 400 or 500 clients come, and we might have 100 cases of wine, and we'd go through that in a night. It just blows me away that we used to do that kind of stuff, and the conversations you'd get in with people, the sales you would make was just crazy. And that was one of the things that led me to really question that whole life of drinking and working, and was it right? And I remember working with a client that we had done 4 or 5 times. We had redone their offices, and it sounds like a small thing, but these are $1 million, a few $1 million sales each. And we had these 3 women that were in charge of a corporation in Anchorage, and our salesperson, we assigned a salesperson to that team, and her whole goal was to get them drunk, to get them to buy furniture. And so they would come in every Friday at 4 o'clock with a bottle or 2 of wine. And by the end of the time, at the end of the 6 weeks, it started off as $100,000 or $200,000 project and ended up being millions of dollars these ladies were spending on something they didn't even need. And I started to feel really guilty about that kind of stuff. At the same time, my brothers and I had decided we wanted to sell the company. And so part of creating the value that we wanted for the company was to find somebody in the city or the state that could come in and take my place as the president of the company. And then my job was to train that person, to get them up to speed so that the value of our company maintained its value if we left. And so we did that, but at the same time, I started showing him all these tricks of drinking and partying. And, one of the things that I did in Chicago, we'd go to Chicago like 3 times or 4 times a year, and there's this little place there called the Red Door, if anybody's been to Chicago. It's a nightclub that's there. And you have to be kind of dressed appropriately. The first time I went in there and I wasn't, they had jackets in the back room that you could rent and you could wear. And you have to wait in line and all that kind of stuff. Well, I learned after about 3 or 4 times there, I could give the guy at the door $100 and he would let us to the front of the line and give us our suits and our shoes or whatever we needed, and we could stay the rest of the night. So I'm teaching him this, and I really didn't think much of it until one day he sent me a text, and he's in Florida at Disney World waiting in line, and he goes up and he gives the guy at the front of the line, a couple $100, and his whole family gets to go to the front of the line. And his wife asked him, "Where the hell did you learn that?" And I'm going, uh-oh, that was me. So it's the things that you do that you don't even think about that affect somebody else's life along the way. And to continue with that story about having him take over my position, right after we got him up to speed, my brothers decided they didn't want to sell. So now we have somebody running the company and I have no job. But I still had a job, I guess. I just didn't have any responsibilities per se. And that's when I went off the deep end, really, because I didn't have much to do. And so I looked at alcohol as being something to do. Here, my schedule would be like I would get up in the morning, I'd go to the gym, I'd come home, I'd have a big glass of sake, I'd go into work, check my emails, and then go to lunch at 2 or 3 o'clock with some friends that I met that were into Japanese food and drinking more sake. And that was not a very fun thing to do. It seemed so at the time, but it didn't do any good, that's for sure. And I was just lost. That's really what it was. I was just lost. And I really didn't know what to do. So I decided I wanted to go to treatment. And so I paid my own way to go to treatment. But one of the things that happened to me in the family situation is when I told my brother I was going to be gone for 45 days down here to Prescott, they were like, "You're ruining this family. We're all alcoholics." Can you imagine running a business with 3 alcoholics and, for 35 years, all doing the same thing all the time? We had business plans that we created 30 years ago, and we still have the same action items on our business plan 30 years later. and then nothing ever got done. It was the wildest thing, but we sure had fun. I can tell you that. Every board meeting we had was, we'd travel to a golf course somewhere, buy really fancy wines and fancy dinners, and that was always the big game, is that if we go out drinking, let Lewis drive because he's the best drunk driver we got. And I can't tell you the opportunities for disaster that could have been. I look back on that now and I'm thankful, I'm grateful that nothing really happened, not only to me, but for somebody else, because, all kinds of things can happen. So after that, I went to recovery here, the Arrowhead, if anybody remembers that, it's up in the hills. It was a men's only over 40 place, and that worked out pretty well. I thought I was doing a good job. I was doing the steps myself with one of the people that was there. And I kind of wasn't really into it. I thought I was, but I obviously wasn't. So when I got back to Anchorage, it wasn't too long after that one of the guys that I had gone to treatment with committed suicide. And I lost it. And anyways, it was just really disheartening to know that you spent all that time doing all that stuff for yourself, and then in just an instant, it all goes away. Before that happened, I should tell you, I did take a whole year off before I went to treatment, and I thought I could do this on my own. And it was horrible. I went to all kinds of functions. I was the only guy that didn't drink, and I was like, I wanted to drink so bad that I planned an event to go to Chicago just to buy clothes and have a dinner with a glass of wine. And that's what I did. I didn't drink any more than that. I just had a glass of wine and came back. But that was the turnaround, and I started drinking again. And one night, I think I was drinking, and my wife said, "I never want to see you drinking." Well, that's all I needed. As long as she didn't see me, I was okay. So for the next couple of years, it was pretty bad. And it was so weird. I was such a cheap drunk. And I really didn't, before I went to treatment, I didn't know what a handle was. I knew it was a large bottle, but I really didn't know what it was. But my MO was, I was so cheap to buy anything expensive, I'd go buy a big jug of something cheap and pour it in little teeny bottles and carry it around with me. And I did that for a couple of years. In fact, we're involved in another organization, and I was elected to be a motivational speaker for these clubs around the world, but mostly here in the United States. And so my wife and I traveled 26 weeks out of each year to go talk at conventions. And the very first one I went to, the guy was my host, said, "You look a little bit nervous." And I said, "Well, I am." And he says, "Well, here, have this." So he gave me a couple of shots of Crown Royal, and that's all I needed. And so for the next 2 years, every time I went up to give a talk, that's what I did. I didn't think anybody knew it, but I'm sure they did. So when I got into AA, it was a totally different thing. You couldn't have your booze to talk. I was scared to death to talk in front of people, even at a meeting. And here I was out talking, to 2,000 people or 200 people at a time, all these different places in Hawaii and New York and Syracuse, all over the country. And it was the weirdest feeling that I had. I needed that booze to lube me up, but then I didn't know what to use, when I was at an AA meeting. So to where I went from there is I had a friend that helped me, introduce me to some people in AA, and he took me around to different meetings and let me get a chance to be part of it. And I was really struggling. I didn't want to do it. I tried it, I thought myself, but I'd never really had a sponsor, and I'd never gone through the steps in a real way. And some crotchety old farts really helped me out. There was one guy that was a senior bank manager, and he gave me his number one night, and I called him in the middle of a drunken stupor and asked him, what the heck can I do to stop drinking? Because I was beside myself. And he just said, "Don't friggin' drink," and hung up. And I did that a couple of times, but I remember that, and I've talked to him since and said that really meant a lot, because if I hadn't heard that, I probably wouldn't have gone down the path that I did. Another guy that was really instrumental, his name was Tony. we called him One-Leg Tony. He was about 85 years old, crotchety old fart, man. He says, your problem is you're self-centered. And I kept looking at him, you're self-centered. But so we were back and forth on this self-centered thing. But one of the things that really hit home to me with him is every time he would see me, he would say, are you still married? And that just tore me up. So anyways, they got me going to meetings and trying to work the steps. And I partnered with Tony to be my sponsor, kind of a roundabout way. And partway through, he said, I can't be your sponsor. So he used to sell jerky in Alaska on the roadside. Here's this guy, and 40 years sober. He's living out of this piece of shit camper, and he's selling jerky on the side of the road in Alaska. And he put all of his grandkids through college. All of his grandkids, every single one of them through college by selling jerky. I mean, it was an amazing story. So when he decided to go back to California for the winter, he asked me to go help him, tie his truck up for the winter. And so I went to help him, but I didn't realize he had another dude in the car with him on the way back that was now my sponsor. And we met on the road from somewhere between Seward and Anchorage on the road, and that's how, and he's been my sponsor ever since. So I don't call him as much as I should, but I do call him every once in a while just to see how he's doing, and he always asks me the same questions, how you doing, and did you get a sponsee yet? And so he helped me through my first sponsee, and that was really nice. The lowest point that I had, even with having all that, I was still a slow learner. And my wife's always wondering, how are you going to meetings and having a sponsor and still drinking? And I couldn't answer it because she's not an alcoholic. For me, I just wasn't there yet. And it was on Thanksgiving, I think on 2017, and I was at my lowest, and I got up from the dinner table, packed my bags, got an Uber, and went to the airport, and I was on my way to Hawaii. And they wouldn't let me on the plane. Number one, I was too drunk. Number two, it was the wrong day. So yeah, that was a really good thing. So we ended up coming down here for a family gathering, and I was not in really good shape. And we stayed in an Airbnb down here in downtown Prescott, and we went to the Unity Church for a service. We weren't members of the church, but we went because my family was. And there was a pastor there that his sermon that day was like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And what's your future like? And I could have swore he was looking right at me, and I figured my cousins and my wife had talked to him before the service because he was just aiming all these things right at me. And so I felt really bad. And some of the rest of my family was still here, and I missed some events that we had that time, and I thought, I've got to get back into this program of AA and start working on myself. So I decided to go to a meeting that next Tuesday. And so I go into this AA meeting here it's downtown. I can't remember the name of the church, but it's on it's on Copper Basin right there in the corner. But anyways, I went there and I sat there, and damned if it wasn't that preacher that came in and sat right next to me from the sermon the Sunday before. And I went, is this a sign or what? And I figured I better do the deal. But I still wasn't ready. And it wasn't until just a short time after that I really messed up with my wife. And she decided that it was time, she'd had enough. And she was going to go back to Alaska. I was going to go back too, but we weren't sure what was going to happen after that. And so that was a really hard time for me. When we got back to Anchorage, I spent a lot of time with my sponsor. We spent hours and hours just talking about stuff. And I'd never been able to do that with anybody before. We went through some really deep stuff. And I was on my way home from a get-together, and I was telling him that my wife is not sure where she's going to go or what she's going to do. And he says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't like the way it is now. I need to change. And he goes, well, then you need to have the blankety-blank courage to do it. And whatever that was, that's what hit me hard. And that's when I started working on the steps full time. And I had that reputation on going to the AA meetings there in Alaska that, yeah, he's probably going out and boozing afterwards. But I remember when I got my 6-month chip, I went to a meeting and I was sitting there, my sponsor wasn't there, and they were asking people, how long they had, and they asked for 6 months, and I stood up, and this guy that I'd known for about 2 years, he said, "No flipping way." And he said, he just looked at me, glared at me, and he says, "Who the hell is your sponsor?" And I told him, he went, "Oh," and he just shut up. And we became really good friends after that. But it wasn't until there was that trust factor. I mean, you still felt welcome and everything, but you could still feel tension. When you're drinking and you're going to meetings, and you can feel the tension that you're really not doing the part that you should. And I really felt that. After that, I was in 100%. I came back here with my wife. We got together with other people here in the fellowship. Went to meetings. I don't go to a lot of meetings anymore, just regular meetings. I love to go to speaker meetings and hear people's stories and hear different things that I could relate to. I've gotten really involved in Al-Anon. I've learned a lot there. But I'd have to say that, life is great. There's so many opportunities. I'm going to step back. When I was drinking full-time, hard and heavy, I was also doing the healthcare deal. And so I was going to the doctor, right? And so they're prescribing more drugs on top of the drugs I was already taking on my own. So I was doing 9 different medications along with drinking. And then when I finally decided to stop that, get sober, I'm on just one right now, and that's just a minimal thing. But my health came back. One of the things my sponsor told me was, take at least an hour a day for yourself and go do something. And so I thought working out, going to the gym, and I was already doing that, but I was never as committed as I am right now to making sure that I maintain the health, and it helps me not to want to go back to the drinking. Some of the things that I think now I see more as I have a different perspective on life. I understand that I'm more tolerant. I think different people have different perspectives, and that's okay. And I like to tell a little story about if you're in a room and there's a window and you're standing on the right-hand side of the window and somebody else is standing on the left, and you look outside and you see a deer, and the person tells you you're full of shit because they can't see one, looking out the other direction, they're not wrong. It's just they're not seeing it from your perspective, and you're not seeing it from their perspective. And this program has taught me to be tolerant in that regard, and it makes things a lot easier when you're more tolerant. At least they do for me. I'm pretty much of a pain in the butt, though. When I have my mind set on something, I have to say that serenity prayer and just pause, before I say something. And I'm still involved in a lot of other organizations, and I like to write. I like to communicate email-wise, as well as on the phone and so forth. I like to do it in person too. But when I write letters to people, I think about what I write now, and I'm a whole lot more methodical about what I'm saying and less offensive when I'm saying it. If I look back at some of the letters I wrote, 6 or 7 years ago, I'm like embarrassed. I can't even see why people would have wanted me to have that role. And it blows me away that somebody can change so much. The other thing I notice when I go to meetings is every time I look out and see a drunk that's recovered, I went, holy crap, there's so many really cool people out there. Once they get sober, that's a whole different life. And then I look at the people that are new, and I say, I can't wait to see what that person's going to look like after they've had a year or two of sobriety, and what it's going to do for them, their families, and themselves. Because it really does change your life. And for me, that it really does, or it did. And so the other day, I was talking with a guy. What did I do with it? I was talking with a guy, and I like to write things. And he said to me, we were talking about technology and how it's involved in everybody's lives nowadays, and how you can get caught up in the metaverse and all this other kind of crap. And he said, could you do me a favor and write something about step 2? And so it just, sometimes the higher power has a way to just make things happen. This took like, I want to say 5 minutes to write, but it's called Came to Believe, and I'll leave you with this. It says, in the matrix of make-believe, where alkies thrive to deceive, life passes us by in the blink of an eye, just struggling hard to achieve. We think it is all up to us, and we'll never think to discuss that there may be a way, we might even pray in a way that's not superfluous. It's not silly to perceive, as we finagle, we bob, and we weave, that a higher power is there all the time, everywhere, not really hard to conceive. Once we are ready to leave the metaverse of make-believe, we open our eyes to the ways of the wise as we finally come to believe. Thank you.